Recording in progress.
Got it.
Go ahead, Candace.
Okay. Hello, Melissa. My name is Candace Jensen. I'm one of the curators of the exhibition Towards a New Animism, which is up here in Brooklyn at Amos Eno Gallery through January 30th, 2022. And I'm here with many of the artists, not all, but many, who are featured in the show. And we are talking with Melissa Troutman, one of the directors of Invisible Hand today. There are so many wonderful correlations and correspondences between the film Invisible Hand, what it's investigating, and some of the themes that our visual work are also seeking to come into conversation with. And so we were inspired to host a screening of the film, which is available for this opening weekend of our exhibition. And we just wanted to invite Melissa here today to chat. And because of the pandemic, we are remote, but we're so graced with the ability to connect via technology. So we figured we would just let this be organic, and of course, having all of the artists, or many of the artists here and the directors of the film together, we're expecting to have some pretty cool stuff come up. So Melissa, I was able to give a brief tour of the show to you a little bit earlier today through the magic of FaceTime. And I just wonder if there was anything that stood out to you that you would love to use as a kind of locus point to sort of start chatting.
Absolutely. I actually took notes, so thank you for that tour. It's really, I had of course hoped to be there in person, but decided to stay home due to the COVID. I'm also, when I'm here in Pennsylvania, I'm with family, and so I try to limit my exposures a lot. We also caretake for my grandfather. So anyway, I loved getting the chance to walk through the gallery earlier, and there are definitely some things that there's definitely some things that really resonated with me. I think before, no, let's stay there. I think, so when you first walk into the gallery, one of David's pieces is right there. It's the piece of, it's the tree that has fallen. It's like the tall stump of the tree. And you were talking about, you had shared something that David had shared, which is that he likes the part of being immersed in nature for 6 to 8 hours, or however long it takes to create that piece, and just observing nature. I don't know if you use the word observe, but being immersed in nature and just tuning into, the movements, the animals, the sounds, and that, what I love the most about that is it really gets to the heart of what I think we're all that so many people are trying to do, and that is at the heart of the cultural shift, the paradigm shift that is necessary, and that is to rejoin nature. We have to realign with nature, with the rest of nature, because we are nature too, right?
Right.
So it's about that relationship. And obviously through all of your work, you are in relationship with nature. I mean, whether you're out, whether it's David's out painting literally in the forest, or you're in your studio, working with moss, or the ceramics, or the ceramic that Jo used to create that saw, whether it's physically or conscious, through your conscience, you are connected, and right. You are in that relationship with everything, right? And it's really beautiful to know that. It's really beautiful to think about that, to think about us all in our individual spaces having relationships with nature, regardless of whether we're inside or outside.
Right. Yeah, that's like a really powerful thing that art objects and artists and art making really does, is like it connects us to that sense of the material. And you know, everything is made of matter, and there's that kind of funny thing, it's made of matter, then it matters quite a lot. Like and so all of us have that, where we're sort of interfacing with a very specific media, and those medium are giving us access to matter and what really creates meaning in our lives, right? Like, so there's this really funny thing that happens where, like, well, you're at one moment you're playing with clay and dirt and silk, or pigments that are dissolved in some kind of oil, and the next minute you're working with both the symbolic and the sort of meaning behind that really base material. So there's this elevation of stuff. You know, I don't mean to get too philosophical too quickly, but you can't escape it, right? Like we are nature both indoors and outdoors, and things are meaningful or natural or valuable, whether they're being applied to a process or simply existing on their own, right? That's kind of one of these intersections that the film has with, I think, all of the work in the show.
That word intersection stuck out to me too when we were walking around the gallery earlier. And you know, we live in such a compartmentalized culture. I mean, even if you think about the way that we learn in school, like when we're brought up, it's all the subjects have their own time, their own class and their own time in your day. And then, you know, even in a single category of learning, everything is parsed into like some kind of chronology or something. And it's not how the world is. So the intersections, I think that playing and weaving is all about intersections, right? And that's what we really need to do, just to weave ourselves back into this relationship. When I say us, I mean, you know, the greater culture, and really paying attention to the intersections, dialing into the intersections instead of dialing into like the specific detail of a particular thing. Not that that's bad, but I think it's really healing to focus on the intersections, because clearly you're focusing on more than one thing at the same time, but also connection. Purely and simply is, I mean, interconnectedness is one of the fundamental laws of the universe. And right. One of the things that I end up talking a lot about in these discussions that come out of the film is that, you know, we inevitably end up talking about, okay, well, how do we put all of this into practice? And as artists, we're putting it into practice, but the audience members essentially come and say, well, what do I do? How do I put this into practice? And it's through relationship and through intersection. And it's also about simply living the fundamental laws of nature. And one of them is the law of interconnectedness, the law of reciprocity, right? Interdependence, thank you, that's it. Interdependence, reciprocity. Every ecosystem has a carrying capacity. We're living well beyond the carrying capacity. You know, I think that just getting down to the fundamentals of the laws of the universe. I didn't learn those in school. Did you guys learn those in school?
Well, no, not unless one of us went to Waldorf or something.
That's true. That's true. I went to public school, so.
Yeah, I'm a product of Pennsylvania public school as well.
Yeah. But even in the general, even in the general world at large, we don't really talk about the laws of the universe. We don't, in society at large, we certainly don't live by them. But
well, there certainly is this tendency to reduce or zero in, right? Like it's what you were talking about before, the quality of silos that we have, subjects, right? Like you're either engaging in science or you're engaging in math. You're either engaging in home economics or you're engaging in gym class. And like that's not really a critique of the educational system so much as a critique of the way that we think about how most of our aspects of our lives, we assume that they don't actually have that interdependence. We sort of have, that's like the cultural oversight, right? That we're sort of highlighting here. Like, how can a river's life be meaningful enough or important enough to grant the rights of personhood if the river has nothing to do with my rights as a person, right? I mean, like that's being overly reductive. But I think that highlighting that way that we can constantly remind ourselves about interconnectedness, constantly remind ourselves about interdependence, that is part of the way forward, right? That's the power. I mean, you're speaking very much and very kindly about the power of art to do such a thing, because we as artists are taking time to be curious, be in observation, and be in relationship, and then we allow our creative process to really make something of that. And that's not necessarily a process that many of us either have time or tendency to do, right? Like that's like the power of art. So one of the questions that comes up is like, well, yeah, exactly what you said. Like, well, so what do I do? Like, if Melissa and Joshua made this beautiful film, if the communities that you're documenting have taken the time to make some of these legal frameworks to protect and honor nature's rights, if we're sitting and making our painting or like lovingly considering the text or the media or the paint, what does the average person do? Or maybe it's that like the creative impulse and the observational and curiosity impulse is like the very thing, right? Like we're not being proscriptive, right?
Yeah, I think we don't, there's no prescription for what to do. I do like I do love to tell people that in any way that you are able to be in relationship with all of nature. And also keep learning about it. So stay curious, right? Keep learning about the rights of nature movement as a whole, which is at this very moment in time, like really making leaps and bounds across the globe. So I don't think you saw this part in the film yet, but the rights of nature movement began in Pennsylvania in 2006. Tamaqua Borough in the eastern side of the state passed the first rights of nature law in the world. And they did so to protect their community from a certain thing from happening. I won't give away too much. From a certain toxic activity happening in their community. And it then caught the attention of people in Ecuador somehow. And at the time, Ecuador was revisiting its national constitution. And so Ecuador became the first nation in the world. Ecuador is like, holy crap, we want to do this. And so they became the first nation in the world to adopt rights of nature into their national constitution. And that was in 2008. And it took a long time. It was for that to actually be enforced, which happened just in December, this past December 2021. The first rights of nature, the Constitutional Court of Ecuador ruled using the rights of nature provision of their national constitution. They ruled in favor of Los Cedros protected forest and removed concessions to their own national mining company to mine in Los Cedros. So this, I cannot even still believe this. And I cannot state how important that this very moment in rights of nature is, because what Ecuador has done is signaled to the world, we are prioritizing nature over our own economic self-interest.
Well, short-term economic self-interest, right?
Short-term economic self-interest,
Right.
exactly, right. By removing mining concessions to its own mining company, which is not just theirs. It's there's a Canadian company involved too in that deal. But all that is to say that, you know, the rights of nature in the way of movements, if you think about rights-based movements throughout time, they have it takes a long time for justice to happen, to occur. I mean, we have human rights, they're still being violated all the time. We have animal rights still being violated all the time. But the rights of nature movement is right on time. And this seems to be the moment when it's really coming into its own. And I expect that from here forward, you know, it's going to be popping every day. You know, when we started this project in 2016, no one knew what rights of nature was. And when we released it in 2020, people were like, just like every once in a while, you'd meet a person who had heard about it. But now if you Google rights of nature, if we do the Google analytics on rights of nature, there's this big spike in interest. So, and I don't think that's just about rights of nature. I think it's also signaling, it's working alongside a lot of other things that we've seen pre-COVID, but especially inside of COVID, the COVID era, which is, well, there's a lot of things going on there, and we could probably talk about that for a while, but it's happening, like, you know, the interest is also happening alongside, I really think, a shift in culture and a shift in ourselves, a yearning for a recognition of the systemic root problems underlying climate change. You know, climate change is a whole problem unto itself, but it's like, it's the symptom of the disease, it's not the disease, right? So we're finally recognizing the root symptom, the root disease, so to speak. And we can only really move beyond that once we recognize it, and we understand it on a systemic level.
Right.
So,
and that root thing that we're sort of pointing at, I mean, to me, and I think I see this reflected in a lot of the work in the show too, is disconnection or lack of self-identification, right? So it's not just about the rights of nature, it's also about like our willingness to be mirrored within our environment, our willingness to see the permeability that our corporeal bodies really have with everything and with everyone. I mean, that is sort of what you're highlighting when we're talking about like this pandemic, right? Like we see the way that we share air. We see the way that the health of my lungs is reflected in the health of your lungs. And like, there's a lot, I mean, that can sound like sappy or even like a little silly, but it only does if you take, it only sounds like that if you take for granted this sort of hyper individualism, this like unwillingness to be connected, which is a false narrative that we've sort of been swallowing for a long time, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're all connected, whether or not we feel that way or see that.
Right.
And
you don't have to believe it to be true.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. So I was reflecting a little bit about like the message of the film, Invisible Hand, the way that you're documenting this fight for legal rights for nature to exist healthily. safely, beautifully. And then the theme of this exhibition, which is like moving towards a new animism and really redefining what we can think of as animated, what we can expect to recognize as having agency or animacy, or being animated in some way. Some of the key words that were sort of coming up to me as I was thinking about that are words like entity and consciousness and even personhood, which has come up a couple of times in this conversation. I think a lot of us, I mean, I'm not speaking for anybody, but there's this sense that we think we know what those terms are. We think we know exactly what that means. And yet, I don't think any of us have any real clue or really have given a lot of thought and can definitively say what is or isn't an entity, a person, a consciousness. There is this idea of panpsychism or universal consciousness embedded in matter. Now, this is like a thing that I'm very interested in. I don't know a lot about it, but it's something I like to read about. And there's other ways of putting that too. I don't know. Do any of you have any thoughts about that sort of thing? Like how we recognize or how we are willing to recognize entities, persons, beings?
I think what has made a difference in my thinking about humans in relation to nature has actually been through reading some of the sort of the more recent scientific breakthroughs in understanding of how nature is not purely competitive. This is something that started at the same time as unbridled capitalism. And I think it has become a very deep part of our culture, of which we tend to be completely unaware. And so there was also a period of time when many scientists looked at the rest of the world, what we consider, animals, natural beings, like whole communities of plants, ecosystems, as being purely competitive, whereas actually it's being shown that they have very complex interrelationships with each other, and by logic with us, so that we are also a very complex system that we are probably too stupid at this point to really understand. And to know that things are much more complex and much more interrelated than anybody can see.
Right, and basically we are just trying to figure out how to interact. And we don't always pick the right path. We don't always make the right decision. Sometimes we screw things up. As long as we recognize that some things are alive, we have to pay attention to the future. We can correct that, but we are just animals as well, just fumbling around trying to figure things out, right? And so that we can be wrong, and still have our hearts in the right place.
And for animals with like a superiority complex, cutting that down, bringing us off our throne, back to the ground. Like that's one of the things with thinking about the pandemic and challenging like the constructs that our culture created to separate us from nature. Like we're so wrapped up in like getting our stock market number up, and we don't care if that gas company like puts that well there, but actually slowing down, and everyone has that opportunity to force themselves to slow down and go out and take a walk, because that's the only thing you can do, and like physically reconnect yourself with a system that you might not have had access to because the world's so busy moving. So I think there's been a lot of blessing in like the disaster of the pandemic in that way, to like force consciousness back to people who are kind of, disconnected through like just the way our society is developed. Like we're moving too fast, but like we haven't been able to catch up, you know, like we haven't given enough time to that, like, I don't want to say spiritual, but like, we've advanced with our technology, but we haven't advanced with the way we connect interpersonally. We haven't advanced with the way we connect to nature, or we've left that behind and consider it like primitive, when in actuality, it's not. Like, ignoring it is like to our own detriment. And like, we're just kind of now realizing that now that it's like, oh, there's all of this disaster. And it's like, how did this happen? I'm like, well, we've ignored a lot of these problems. We need to fix them.
That came up earlier when Melissa and I were checking in a little bit and doing our walkthrough of the exhibition. That idea of busyness and urgency, right? Like when we do wake up and sort of see what's going on, whether you're talking about industrial extraction or pollution or just unawareness about how to be respectful and mindful to other beings, there's such a sense of urgency that you just want to do something right away. And that doing and that kind of inherent like knee-jerk thing, that's not the same thing as what we're really talking about here. We're just like feeling into a different way of being, feeling into a different way of being. Actually, that's one of the coolest things we've got here at the show. Everything's very cool. But Grant did this really exciting installation in the project space in the back of the gallery, where here in New York City, in an art gallery, you can go and do some forest bathing. You can sit with the sound and the imagery and the ionizer, the ionic, of basically Northern California forest, getting a little bit, and it's a very different pace than the front gallery, which is also calm and beautiful, but it's different to sort of go and sit in the woods, right? It's different to take a walk. It's different to being instead of doing, or even waiting and letting that curiosity take hold a little bit, which directs us very, very differently than the kind of manifestation of solutions or the immediate response to try to take control of something that seems like certainly gotten out of hand, right?
Yeah, we're living in this really intense paradox of urgency in terms of ecological collapse, but also we're not going to fix the problem from that mindset. We really have to just stop and address the root problems instead of trying to incrementally, tinker with the machine. The other thing that came up is the busyness. I think, Jo, you said something about busyness, and it reminded me that busyness is a trauma response. It's a way to live outside of our trauma and to keep ourselves distracted from our traumas. And I mean, I'm not going to say that our culture is busy, moving so quickly because of that. But at the same time, I think, being disconnected in the way we are is a form of trauma. I mean, it's a trauma for the earth, it's a trauma for us, and we're trying to fill the hole that would otherwise be, that exists because of that disconnection with a lot of other stuff, and to just keep moving. Yeah, that's a really strong indication of trauma, is somebody who or when a person can't just stop doing. I know I've had to do a lot of work on being a workaholic, and so that's where that's kind of where I learned that, and like looking at my my ancestry, and like I come from people who are just, they don't stop, they just have to keep going and keep doing and keep working, and luckily they also are still tied to the land, so that still is there. But yeah, and as far as like what does it mean to be an entity, and what does it mean to be a person or a living thing, or to have consciousness, I mean, we we have barely touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding what that actually means in the world. Like, what does it mean to have consciousness? But also, we live in a world where things are very concretely defined and not in fluid ways. And we live in a world, and this is what inspired us what is one of the things that inspired us to make this film, is because as investigative journalists, we find ourselves covering the same kind of problem over and over and over and over and over and over again. And even though the corruption behind a problem is exposed, nothing changes. And so we're like, okay, why is this happening? And it took us it created this opportunity to look at things systemically. And one of the things that we realized, and Josh, if you're still here, feel free to jump in. But one of the things we realized is that in the structure of our law, nature is defined as property. Our whole law is based on commerce law. It is all based on nature as property. Even the Clean Streams Law, which is a place where, which is the law where we have our most stringent protections for water, and the Safe Drinking Water Act. Even those two particular laws are still embedded. They come out of a foundation of law that is still commerce law, where you can still do things to streams under the Clean Streams Law if you have the permit. And the permit is what gives you authority to treat nature as property. So yeah, we have a Clean Streams Law, but streams are still the property of the government, clearly, or they wouldn't be the authority to grant the permit to do something to the stream. Or the authority to punish you when they actually do that. And this brings me back to the beginning of towards the beginning of our conversation, where, people always ask, where we were talking about what we as artists are doing already, but also when audience members ask, what do we do? I usually try to keep it on like the light side at first, like be in relationship, nurture your connection, stay curious, and all of those things. But the harsh truth is also that we are all doing these things inside of a structure where nature is still defined as property. And if we go against that system, still in the United States, in Ecuador, it's a different situation now, thank goodness. But in the United States, when we go against that, or in Canada, I don't know if y'all are watching the pipeline camps and but when we go against that structure wherein nature is clearly concretely defined as property, we go to jail and we get fined and we get hurt. And in Latin America, environmental journalists and activists get killed. I think it's in Latin America is the highest rate of murder of indigenous and environmental activists and journalists. So
right.
There's
like,
greater question.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Candace.
No, you're highlighting that inherent challenge that we have then, because it came up in the show a lot here. Like, how do you interface with these dire issues, but keep it light enough, right, that it's not paralyzing, right? Like, that's not entirely exactly what you were saying, but there are the ways to be in relationship and to be curious and to find ways to love and connect with our surroundings, with other beings. And then there's like the fight that needs to happen. And there's the sort of the dark clouds that are hanging over us in many, many ways that can be really, really paralyzing and can be difficult to like really know how to respond to. What's up?
And as aware of the environment as I am, and all the things I do, recycling, I just can't shake a sense of guilt that that all of this is I'm not going to solve climate change by doing it, right? And I have a kind of sense of guilt that I'm not doing enough. All my little drawings and paintings are just, piddly, drop in the bucket. And you address that. I know you do in the film a little bit, but if you could talk about that.
Right. Like we feel like we're doing so little, even when we're doing something, right?
Yeah. I identify with that feeling, and I mean, almost everyone I talk to does too, David. I think that, that's, I think I've tried to like rescript how, what that feeling really is. So it feels to me like guilt, but I've tried to kind of, talking about being like fluid in our definitions, right? I've tried to like revision it as a call to maybe change or adapt something that I'm doing, and focus on that instead of sinking into that feeling of guilt, because I think we really have to remember that we did not create this world, and that we have to, and we tell audiences all the time, like, do what you can with what you have, from where you are, and that's physically in the world, but also mentally and emotionally and spiritually too. The reason I had to work on my workaholism in the past is because I worked myself into a frenzy and ended up really damaging my body in really screwed up ways, because I was pushing past my limits, and really to probably avoid in part that feeling of guilt and responsibility that I wasn't doing enough, I wasn't making enough happen, and I then tried to do way too much for way too long, and it really damaged me, and then I couldn't do anything. So that's a really tough spot. It's a really soft spot. And I think if we can, when we feel that vulnerable, when we feel something like that feels like guilt, to just really be gentle with ourselves and try to kind of reframe it as maybe I just need to rest, and maybe think about, maybe this is a call to do something a little differently. Maybe I take my work into a new place that wouldn't otherwise see it. Lots of things can come from that, but
Right.
that sense of urgency, of course, makes it all the more intense. Yeah.
I wanted to jump in there too, Melissa,
Josh, thanks.
just to like get people out of that space. We work with a big team of people. We're all kind of like in that realm of guilt. Sorry, I'm in my long underwear. It's freezing here in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh. So whatever.
Wait, are those the ones with the butt flap?
Yeah, of course. That's how I do it. I don't screw around.
Awesome. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
We part of rights of nature, part of that realm is getting away from this sickness and disease of individualism that capitalism and the free market has plagued our society with for hundreds of years now. So as each of us reflect on our own individual actions, we're kind of like falling victim to that sickness. And really with rights of nature is you're removing the ego, right? You're removing the self, and you're replacing it with nature, and you're replacing it with a collective identity, so that you're no longer, pretending that the pressure is on yourself and that kind of thing, but instead you're putting nature at the center of that decision making, and you're formulating ideas and formulating action within that realm. And at that kind of collective energy is really what's witnessed in the film. Is you have this momentum and this movement of these individuals across the globe who are woven together as Melissa said earlier, through rights of nature thinking. They're threaded together through this belief system, because it's, of course, it's not this very simple, we're going to give personhood to nature, but it's a belief system. So you joining and being part of that belief system is a profound and radical revolutionary shift in this society. It will probably, change democracy as we know it, change capitalism as we know it. We'll likely see a new government, a new economy, if all this stuff moves forward. So there's a lot of hope and a lot of great things to focus in on that, just by participating within that paradigm of thought. And it's a very powerful and impactful thing to be doing. And also you're respecting the people here who helped to protect this land before us, which is the indigenous wisdom that they had. They looked at it through roles and responsibilities rather than rights per se. And, this is just our way of grappling with not having, a doorway like that within Western thought, because, of course, of these very selfish individual paradigms that we've been stuck with for hundreds of years now. And that's why we tackle that in the film. That's why it's called Invisible Hand. It's about the shift from this economic theory that man is the one pulling the strings behind the closed doors. Well, maybe that was true when we had unlimited resources, but now, nature's the one kind of pulling these strings. That means that all economic theory needs to be flipped on its head and reassessed and retaught within classrooms across the globe. So yeah, a lot of hopeful things. Don't knock yourself into despair, especially with rights of nature. If you focus on that, there's some great stuff out there. So
that's a really great point, Josh, and it's actually close to what I was also going to say. This idea that we've been sold that the problem is that me as an individual is failing to recycle my soda can, right? Like this, this one person needs to pull their weight. It is a kind of toxic individualism to get stuck in that mentality. I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing the right thing. I. It's really reductive. It's not about connection. It's not at all about collective will, and it's not at all about belonging together, right? It's not at all about pooling our resources and our care into efforts that are greater than ourselves. That's tricky though, right? Because we operate so individually within our culture, and even, as artists, like bringing it back into this idea of the exhibition, like we have a particular perspective and a particular way of interacting with materials that's allowing us to come forward with these beautiful images and objects and phrases and everything else that we make. And there is a kind of false dichotomy that we are struggling with here, which is like, well, the power and beauty of an individual being doesn't deny the interdependence and connectivity of them as being part of something much larger. And that's really what ecosystem is, right? Like when in the film, when we talk about a river as a person, it's not because the river is a person like we think of ourselves as a person. Even me, I'm made up of billions of tiny living things. And we're always exchanging life. There's a constant exchange happening. And so the illusion of that separateness and the illusion of that solidity, I think that's really the culprit that we're talking about here, right? Like no one of us can do enough, but all of us could very, very easily do something together. That's really inspiring, which to me is the point of making any of this stuff. It's like to get inspired about something completely different. One of the books that we have on display in the exhibition and available to read is Becoming Wild by Carl Safina, and he writes about animal cultures. And he has taken great pains to use his research to help illuminate the fact that other animals besides human animals appreciate and make beauty, and that beauty and aesthetics are a crucial part of consciousness and what culture really is. The idea that culture itself is somehow different than nature, and that by acting out our human impulses of creativity and productivity or whatever is somehow working against it. Like, that's also a big lie we've been sold, right? Like nature, cultural, why can't I say that? The false dualism of those things. Yeah, I mean, my head starts swimming with all of the different possibilities of like what it is that we could sort of, I actually don't think it takes that much, because it's like a very small shift to start seeing outside of that tunnel vision.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, because one thing that sounds almost silly that I think is really important as far as a cultural shift is that people are beginning to really connect with other animals. Like you go on Instagram and you see all these squirrel kind of like sites where people have brought wild animals into their own lives, or they're interested in interspecies friendships, for instance. And you know, I was really pleased to hear that. I think it was Spain recently recognized a whole broad range of non-human animals as being sentient beings. Because that is so different from what I think mainstream culture thought maybe 50 years ago, 75 years ago, where you know we are at the apex and we're just it's a shift, and a very tiny shift. It's just part of the, you know, our trying to find it.
Right, that's like what Melissa was highlighting before. Like, you start to see these things cropping up more and more and more, and it's hope giving, right? Like, it gives you a kind of life to see some of this stuff going mainstream. The tributary of ecological activism and of you know, creative, interesting thinking about relationship is creating a river of different consciousness. That's incredibly cool.
Even animism, I see more and more people talking about animism and running courses on Instagram about animism and ancestral heritage and just you know, cosmology and all of these really fringe things, these things that have been kind of fringe for a really long time, at least fringe from the mainstream, obviously. And yeah, there's all these different, I love that river metaphor, Candace, all these different streams of changing, kind of evolving, like, yeah, changing consciousness all flowing into this river. And, you know, to go back to what David said about that feeling of guilt sometimes, and of the great additions you guys had about, like, you know, feeling individually responsible in an ecosystem. I think that no matter what we do, we, the collective we, or the individual we, no matter what we do, the change is happening and is going to happen. And it's a matter of whether we swim against it or we swim with it. And really, that is something else that I need to be better at reminding myself of, is that it's all happening and it's going to happen. You know, the earth has a carrying capacity. We're either living inside of it or out of it. And that once, you know, what's going to happen is going to happen. So the more we can swim with, swim in alignment or with the flow, right, of the river, and then inspire other people to come into that same path or that same pattern, then we're fucking doing it, you know. We're doing it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, Melissa, and it's about like which river you're swimming in, right? Like, maybe don't swim in the river of what light bulbs to change, but instead swim in the one about Ecocide, you know, and the one that's like possibly like getting like a
They're
collective.
mutually exclusive rivers, though.
I know what you mean. Yeah. But there's like, there's a way that you can pull yourself away from, that kind of individual vortex and be part of the we, and be part of that collective group, and not feel so confined, with your individual decisions. And it's just by participating, in those spaces, participating like in the Ecocide space or the rights of nature space that can quickly take you away, from that stuff. Like, you talk like these shows are so important now that, that the vanity of human identity is kind of being stripped away from a show like this, and you're more or less focused on our relationship with nature and that interdependence. So art and art exhibits like this are extremely valuable to this whole idea about changing language, changing thought, bringing us back to a space that we haven't been in for a long time, because we've just been sort of painting and designing very selfish pieces about us in particular for a lot of the great works of art, and as an art collector, like I collect tons of art, like that's what I want to see. And as a painter, that's what I want to paint. But it's not what people want, on their walls all the time. So that can shift, hopefully, right? Hopefully this idea of what's valuable can totally shift into this type of space where curators are like, well, I don't know if I want to have a show about this very like product looking, human centered thing. I think people really, would want something else besides, they would want like a show about ecocide, a show about rights of nature, a show about like that language and that relationship that we have. And that kind of artwork is what, inspires me to be drawn or to buy something, and put value behind it. So I hope that's changing. It seems like there could be a shift in colleges. We have major schools, Johns Hopkins, Harvard, other Ivy League schools that are licensing Invisible Hand and designing courses that talk about, human identity in the self and what it means to be a person, what is a person. So that's hopeful for me, that it's getting into the academic space, which could then hopefully translate into more creative work like that, that comes out
But
of
I
it.
think in the art world too, like, I don't know, Joyce and I, we talked about doing the show over the last year because we've both been working with environmental themes for a very long time. And I know I've felt like a niche artist in many spaces. And I'm feeling less and less niche. I'm feeling a little bit more mainstream these days, right? There is this kind of interest in moving past anthropocentric myopia. And then of course, to bring this back to like how great it is to be speaking with you, Melissa and Josh, and those of you who are joining us today, and the artists, like, we are refusing to say that the singular effort or the singular creative thing that I'm doing is happening by itself. It's happening simultaneously. You're making this film, I'm making this painting, you're talking to these people who are making this effort at shifting the legal system. We're sculpting, we're witnessing through photography. Those things are happening, and they're happening in relationship to each other. And yeah, you can't stop the tide from changing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I think we could talk at great length. And obviously, I want to stay in connection with you guys and continue to help get the word out about your amazing film. But I guess because, in interest of keeping things powerful, condensed, short and sweet, we could think about wrapping up the conversation for today. If there are any final thoughts from any of the artists or any of the audience who have joined us, I'd love to consider them for a second. But I don't want to completely close out prematurely.
I have kind of a thought to conclude.
Joe?
So I think coming off your point of sort of like the guilt of recycling and, you know, explaining why the kids can't throw their cup out the window when you're driving. You know, like it's, you know, I think that one of the powerful things about the film and about, you know, participating in a show like this with other like-minded artists is participation. It's like amazing to see what the power of people are like. I forget the woman's name is in the film, but she was talking about all the propaganda going against this movement to make Lake Erie a person. And then the people are like, no, it's a person. Just like seeing the power of participation and like, you know, we might not think we're doing a lot, but, you know, if someone is like pausing to consider this, you know, and just like kind of, you know, planting those seeds and like having that something that can grow and like, you know, so that person that might not have voted for something might hear about it and be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna vote for this because, you know, like I believe in this, you know, creating this like new belief system. It's like about those little changes and like really like planting those seeds. And I think that that was like really powerful thing in the film that I really like enjoyed seeing. Like it heartens. It's like, I don't know, seeing like the best of humanity is refreshing.
Seeing
So
the best of humanity
yeah.
is refreshing. Seeing the best of humanity is refreshing.
The best of humanity in connection with nature.
Beautiful. It's not just refreshing, it's nourishing, right?
Yeah.
You're getting a kind of nutrition from seeing our efforts come to fruition. And from seeing the powerful presence and loving care of other humans. That's like, yeah, being in right relationship is about witnessing right relationship and then being willing to mirror it in your own lives. It's really cool.
Jo said the word pause, and that is another word that I wrote down when you were giving me the gallery tour, Candace. And I think I wrote it down when we were looking at David's bigger piece of the woman in the forest, the woman-like figure, at least, in the forest, and it's how it's all paused in this moment of so much happening. Like, is it a forest fire? Is it a logging? Is she helping? Is she helping the industrialists? Or is she helping the forest? Like, and all of the work there really makes us, I love that moment of pause, especially because like we were talking earlier, we're always moving, right? And a river is always moving too. But pausing for a moment to really just reflect on the situation that we're in, that's where the answers come from. The answers don't come from trying to stay in our rational mind and like tinker, figure it out. Oh, there's a problem, there's a solution, you know, and like the real answers come when we pause, right? So anyway, I think that's my last thought. other people's
really,
thoughts.
really exciting. So yeah, I think here in the gallery we have free tickets to stream the film. We're trying to spread the word to our gallery patrons that Amos Eno Gallery is, you know, giving access to the film all this weekend. Towards a New Animism, and the work up in this show will be here in Bushwick in Brooklyn through the end of January, and we'll be sharing images of the artwork and commentary about the meanings and bios about all of our really talented, wonderful artists, like throughout the month on the social media channels. So like following Amos Eno on Instagram or checking out amoseno.org is probably the quickest way to get some of that information. Yeah, I'm just looking forward to seeing where more of these kinds of conversations can go. It's so heartening to have artists supporting artists and to see what artists are really capable of inspiring outside of the art world. So, you know, thank you so much to all of the artists. Thank you so much to the filmmakers, and this has been really, really awesome. What a great collaboration. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out, and enjoy the rest of your opening weekend, you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Candace. Been great job on your show. It's a brilliant show, and everybody's artwork is awesome. So I can't wait to look more into it.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, and I actually do have one more thing. And continuing conversations, I would really be interested in continuing conversations, even maybe in person, like once the weather's nice. And I dream of an opportunity where artists can get together and kind of deep dive into these conversations and maybe collectively create something too. When we're like, I don't want to say retreat, but I did. So anyway.
Retreat is always a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's not the end. It's like you pause, you have this conversation, and then we pause, we digest, we sort of see what comes of it, and be willing to re-engage. Rest, and then be willing to re-engage.
Yeah.
So
thanks again. This is really cool. And I'm so glad that I know about all of your work now. So
great. Thank you so much. Be in touch. Great.
awesome.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.